Good morning. You're listening to WPVM in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial. This is the BLAINESWORLD show, and we're here each Wednesday at 9 a.m. You can also watch us on WPVM's Facebook page. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield. I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, what we do is focus on the Asheville theater scene, as well as on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce my first two guests, and they are Bill Branyon and Lauren Eavarone. And welcome aboard, Bill and Lauren. You can wave to all your fans and friends in Facebook world. So if you're watching, you see Bill and Lauren. And in terms of introductions, I should mention that Lauren Eavarone is a Manhattan-based licensed marriage and family therapist with over 15 years of practice that has revealed the obvious need for better relationship education. She secured her undergraduate degree in psychology at Tampa University and her LMFT at LIU in Brooklyn. In addition to clinical work, she's been cited in several well-known publications, digital platforms, including Marriage.com, Bravo TV, Shape Magazine. You can find more information about her website. We'll give that out in a second. And Lauren, you forgot the most important thing. You're also now appearing on BLAINESWORLD. So
Yes, absolutely.
We
I
now
have to add that.
we have to change that introduction. Bill Branyon, personal friend of mine, is a widely read and published boomer journalist, a founder of the Mountain Express newspaper, and an eclectic, certainly describes you, Bill, author specializing in books promoting the freest possible thinking. His three published books are Asheville, North Carolina, circa 2000 AD, a historical fashion about Asheville politics and culture, with over 200 almost recognizable characters in the political philosophy book, Liberating Liberals, and the respectful sci-fi history of modern American religion, Billy Graham Does Heaven. So guys, the first question I always ask guests, and I'll start off with Lauren, is that, so you're this therapist, you've done a whole bunch of other things. Where did you grow up as a kid?
I grew up in New York on Long Island,
Me too, where?
Suffolk County, Huntington.
Okay, I grew up in Nassau County, so not too far from you.
Not
And
too
when you were
far.
a little girl growing up in Suffolk County, did you always know you wanted to be a marriage therapist?
Not at all. No.
What did you want to be? Do you know? Do you remember?
I probably like a superstar or something like that.
A
No, I
super,
went to undergrad initially for sports management, and then I realized you had to go to law school, and I wasn't too fond of that, so I redirected. I took my first psychology class, and I was hooked.
okay. And then so then you became a marriage therapist at that point in time?
No, you take a diverse range of classes, and the ones oriented around relational matters, I found myself most excited to go to. And once you get into the graduate level, you can have more of a niche program. And so I really wanted to organize my educational experience around the things that I feel invigorated by, and relational matters is just that. So
And it's kind of interesting, or I'll let you tell the story then, is how then you met Bill Branyon, so that you've been doing this thing for a bunch of years, and all of a sudden this guy from Asheville, he contacted you? Was that what happened?
that is correct. Yes.
How'd that come about?
Yeah. So Bill reached out to me via email, just kind of presenting this advanced romance that we have now in something that he had been working on and was pursuing an additional co-author, maybe multiple. And he gave me a breakdown of some of the key concepts, which were very relevant to things that I highlight. And if you look at my website, there's blogs that I've written, uh, the articles I've contributed to. It's all oriented around a lot of the ideas that we that are that consist of in advanced romance. And so, given that that was something that was highlighted in the email, it drew drew my attention. And so then we began having a conversation and getting into greater detail. And I was open to this idea. I always wanted to write a book, and here was an opportunity in front of me. And as long as we swim eye to eye on things, and I thought that would be a wonderful experience to have to explore.
And Bill, the question is then, so how do you find Lauren? So you had this idea to write this book, right? And you went about trying to find an author. How did you find Lauren?
Yeah, I knew I needed some authority on this because I have a master's degree in history, and that doesn't make me a relationship expert. I have 66 years of experience in the courts of love, but that doesn't make it me one either. It doesn't. So I decided I needed. So I started looking up LMFTs in Asheville and New York, which is places I live in on and off, and got a few bites in Asheville, and but the only bite I got in New York was Lauren, and she was the best one that I did because she had a lot of references in magazines she'd been quoted in, and then I decided that's the best the best connection I could get, and so it worked out perfectly.
Now, when you sought out Lauren, did you have the idea for the book, or you had the idea for the 16 rules, or how'd that come about?
Yeah, the 16 rules.
Go ahead. Bill. Please.
Yeah, I'd written a real short book that was just pretty much the 16 rules. And so I sent her a proposal of those. And yeah.
And so you actually had the 16 at that point in time?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, Lauren, you ran with that he gave you, the proposal, and you said each of those make sense?
Yeah, and also some of the greats that he was mentioning, like Esther Perel, Helen Fisher, David Buss, and their work, and not having a rigid perception of what relationships ought to look like. And I thought that I could contribute to expanding on some of the science behind that, some of the elements that I present in my work with clients to otherwise challenge what we call irrational or rigid concepts or scripts that really make people unhappy, oftentimes, are the underlying cause rather than per se, anything real lifetime. So I thought, based off of, and when you'll get into it, but the 16 fundies are debunking these otherwise well-known concepts or ideas or narratives.
And if I can just mention, I'll show the book, and we'll show it again, but the front of the book, but I love the back of the book as well, and I think the back of the book really grabs people when you say, for the battle-scarred yet still incurable romantic, so there's still hope. And I love what you say after that. Examples of the 16 romantic rules of advanced romances that are no longer or only partly true. And that's kind of interesting. So this was kind of like a myth-breaking thing, or you took like certain rules and said that, Bill, they didn't make sense to you at that point in time?
Anymore. They made sense in the 50s, maybe. But not so much anymore. So, like the excess sex industrial complex, that's one of the rules, one of the fundies. And the 60s we had free love, and plus evolution wants us to have as many mates as we can have. That's one of the big pressures on us, and the media seems to want it too. But we're seeing now that it's been 60 years since the 1960s, and we're beginning to realize that if you jump into bed with everybody you're attracted to, that's often a very painful thing to do. In many ways, STIs, sexually transmitted infections, sexually transmitted. Yeah. Not to mention broken hearts. And so we think we've sort of evolved past that now in society in a lot of ways. And so in addition, we found that you can have a lot of sexual benefits by just talking with people you're attracted to. You don't have to, go all the way to achieve significant sexual energy from that.
Well, what I found interesting, Bill, when you were telling me about it over lunch a couple of weeks ago, was the fact that the two of you have kind of different backgrounds in terms of relationships. As you mentioned before, that you've been single, right, all your life. Mm-hmm. So you
yes.
Never married. And Lauren, not to pry, but you were, I think Bill said you have a relationship, or you're.
Yes, I have a long-term relationship.
Okay, so was that, not I won't say tough, but was that kind of a challenge for you to be able to balance that, somebody who has been in a long-term relationship with some guy who's not in a relationship? That
Well, I
must,
am in a relationship.
well, I'm sorry, but not, you haven't been married.
Haven't been married.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's the goal, to keep it that way?
Yes.
Okay. So is that interesting for you, Lauren, to write with somebody with that perspective?
Not at all. I mean, I work with people, and I also I don't believe in one right way of living or loving, and so I appreciate the fact that the way that Bill finds his happiness and connection, and I'm not closed off to any which way as long as it's consensual adults. And so, no, I thought it was actually complementary to our work.
Well, let's take then some of the things you did come up with and talk a little bit, Bill and Lauren, about how it's evolved or changed. And I'll just kind of call them in. Or why don't you take another one that you think is kind of an interesting one for people to look at?
Well, one that I favor probably the most is and that's relevant to conversations that I have with clients, is this the failure, if not forever, fallacy, right? And so what comes to mind, right, when you think of failure, if not forever, is that if a relationship ends, then there's some negative connotation to that. You're a failure. It was a failure. The people will perceive me as a failure, right? And so you then find the consequence of that is possibly staying in a relationship that is past its expiration date, that we're just stagnant in or unhappy with ourselves in, for the sake of that script that somewhere along the line society has informed us that you stick with your mate. Otherwise, like there's shame. It's taboo to separate, and you see that in previous generations. Obviously, more recent generations, there's 50-ish% divorce rate, but there's still a lot of embarrassment that comes with separation, despite this normal, I guess, percentage rate that we're typically aware of, we're informed of. And I think the failure, if not forever, fallacy is also my favorite, is because challenging that, we can recognize that, like, where did we get this concept of permanence? And that, like, impermanence is bad. What if things, and I think this goes into what Bill was saying before, what if you can have wonderful conversation with someone, a relationship with them, and then it ends, and it was intended to just be that, and you can take away the meaning from that without having to, have this whole, carry the weight of, well, it didn't turn into anything, so that's really disappointing. Well, who's to say it was supposed to turn into anything, right? Well, it disqualifies the entire experience. It puts a little muddiness to it. And so we want to reduce the muddiness and allow us to just be present.
Well, by the same token, and I'll ask Bill if he's ever had this in his life, it must be kind of cool that if you come to that conclusion that the relationship isn't forever, and that you can also leave on good terms, and be friends. And Bill, have you had that at all in your life?
Yes. That's we call that the wreck the X hex, and that's one of the fundies. And we had a 50% divorce rate almost, and I've read an 85% breakup rate. Almost everyone's experienced a breakup,
right?
So it's something you should expect, right? And you may get together with these people in the future. So it's just a transition. It doesn't have to be looking at it as an ultimate ending. It's just a transition. And though, the failure if not forever fallacy, it seems like maybe we're, suggesting monogamy, a lifelong monogamy, is not a good thing. But we have other fundamentalisms, such as the grass is greener misdemeanor, or the excess sex industrial complex, that promote monogamies and advise, if you have a good monogamy, you probably want to keep it, because it is a relationship jungle out there. So we're sort of clearing away detritus from all angles of relationships.
Well, we'll talk about what you just said too. And again, I love the concepts that came up. What do you call them? Fundies, you call them? What's the expression?
Fundamentalism, short for fundamentalism.
But I love it.
Rules, but they become so powerful as Lauren was describing, such powerful narratives that they might as well be like religious fundamentalism, because to break out of them is a tough thing to do.
And talk about the one you just mentioned, and I'll have Lauren give her opinion as well. But I love the concept of, the grass is greener, and people oftentimes think that. And what's your thinking on that?
Well, it's again, there's a lot of pressure for that. Evolution wants you to maximize your DNA combinations. Again, in the 1960s, free love, and the media. So many movies are about people breaking up and what Kramer v. Kramer, etc. And so. This love is an illusion machine. You have all these chemicals. You see somebody, there's about 7 chemicals that you see somebody you're attracted to, 7 chemicals go off in your brain. Oh, this has to be great. But this is an illusion. Your reality is your monogamy, is the person you know. And so you project so much energy over here, but once you understand that's what's going on, then you can appreciate your monogamy more.
And Lauren, I guess from a counseling standpoint, talk about how you work with clients in terms of helping them realize that, and not only realize that, I guess accept it and make their life easier if they kind of can come to some kind of agreement on that principle.
Well, I think to what Bella was saying, right, is our hope is to inform or educate folks, right, on some key influential factors that are informing our mating behaviors, right? So grass is greener misdemeanor is also targeting the fact that, yeah, you may find another person attractive or, get excited of the idea of an alternative relationship after, you've been in a relationship for some time or you just feeling stagnant. And that's it also relative to some evolutionary components, it's relative to some biological components, societal components. And when we get to know the layers there that are the causation underneath all of that, then we have the ability, at least, to make a more informed decision as to, okay, that's normal that I'm feeling this way, but can I bring my attention maybe back to the monogamy that I know to be, compatible with, that I've worked hard on, despite having these fantasies or attraction to something other than.
Who should be reading this book?
Everyone.
And everybody's listening.
Taught in high schools and colleges, and for those that didn't get any good relationship education there, for the rest of your life.
Well, so is that something, Bill, you recommend that people, I guess, read ideally before they get into relationships, but even if they're in relationships, would that be a good book for them to read?
Yes, absolutely. We think it's fun because we have a lot of quotes from musicians that sort of spice it up. You could get dry since we talk about chemicals and evolution, but then when you have Sade singing "In Heaven's Name, why you play these games, hang on to your love," and it's sort of, we know we're dealing with an emotional powerhouse here in discussing this.
It's interesting. As you're talking, let me see if I can get that question. We just got a question from our guest the second half, and she says, is the book only geared to those who are interested in monogamy? Does it address other relationships, other than monogamous relationships?
In particular, it is targeting, heteronormative relationships. However, there is an entire chapter dedicated to consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, and educating readers on their alternative styles of relationships, because I and we definitely want to emphasize we're not suggesting a right way of being, and that's something that's important here. This is applicable to any folk. But yeah, so there's an entire chapter dedicated to discussing of non-traditional style of relationship.
What about the issue, I guess, the people who read the book or will read the book, who have been brought up in very traditional ways of thinking, that they get married, at the age of 21, 22, and this is the only way to go. Is it hard for them, I guess, to see that there are other options out there? Can people's opinions be changed on some of this, do you think, Bill?
Yeah, well, that's one of my favorites is the hurting by subverting flirting, Bundy. And the change is sort of thrust upon us because women, in the 1950s, women weren't in the workplace much. They were secretaries, nurses, that's about it. Now women are everywhere. And so you have to confront, you suddenly have a project to do with somebody you're really attracted to. What do you do with that? And as Lauren was talking about a little bit, how do you handle those feelings? And you find out that, well, I can just flirt. You really can't control your flirting that much because it's almost an unconscious thing. But you can say, well, I'm having these feelings, but I still love my monogamy. In fact, I heard a Frank Sinatra song the other day. You look great and all this, but I love my wife. Let's just get that straight. But and so this is what people are confronted with today, all the time. And so one of the new factors that women's liberation has brought about. So how are you going to handle it?
Where did you come up with the idea for these 16 rules, and how long have you been working on them?
It just evolved. Yeah. Again, 2004 was the date I published Asheville, NC, circa 2000 AD, Confessions of a Serial Monogamous. And so that idea wasn't very popular. So I tried it from a different angle. And eventually these 16 coalesced out of it. They just sort of fell, oh, this is this. This gets its own category. This gets its own category. Yeah, it's been a sort of a meditation for about 20 years.
When I heard about the book initially, I said, wow, this is some concept. I never even thought about most of these, if any of them. Had you ever come across these, or I guess not only come across these, but expressed in the terms that Bill expresses them? Have you seen them before?
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen them all organized together and addressing. What we're doing is addressing key things that, again, create some of those otherwise unpleasantries within our own minds or within our relationships. So, for example, the hurting by subverting flirting that he was just discussing. What I find is that people start to question whether it's their partner's intention or their own. Okay, I'm having these this attraction to something else, someone else. Does that mean something's wrong with my relationship? And no one really talks about that because people want to protect the relationship and people want to protect themselves. I don't want to be judged, right? And so we talk about it and we normalize it and say that's just human. It's not so black and white. I think we make things more gray, and it gives you, again, more power of choice and knowing that, these are some things that come up as a human being. That doesn't mean your relationship's bad. One doesn't equate to the other. And so, again, that's just one example. But all of these are relevant matters that come up, whether it's in my, educational experience or in my my work.
Now, in your work, have you ever co-written another book, for example?
No,
before?
I have not. I just have contributed to some articles, as you mentioned.
So describe the process, and I'll ask Bill to talk about it as well. But it's pretty kind of cool that you get this email from a guy from Asheville. Had you been familiar with Asheville, by the way?
No, not so much.
Okay, so this guy sent you an email. I guess it must have been a pretty powerful email that attracted your attention, or that caught your attention. And so, what was it like writing a book? Bill's come up to New York, but what was it like writing a book with somebody else like this, especially this book? Describe the process.
Well, I think for us, it was this was during the pandemic. So it was a lot of back and forth via email. It's a lot of getting on the same page in terms of language, emphasizing, I think, for me was objectivity. That's a big part of my work. I don't lead from a right or wrong, and I really wanted to emphasize that in advanced romance, and I think Bill was on board with that. And I wanted to introduce some themes into there, which I appreciate how open Bill was in terms of, for example, polyamory, non-traditional relationships. I didn't want to close the door to any folk. And so it was honestly just a lot of collaboration by email. We sat down together like this, and we've kind of gone back and forth into what to keep, what to take out, what to put in. We've also had some other people in our circle read through some of the stuff and contribute as well as to their feedback. So,
Bill, the same question, excepting a little bit different in that you've written a bunch of books, but is this the first one you co-wrote with somebody else?
Yes.
And describe the process. Yeah.
Well, a lot of it was validation of the research I'd done up to that point. As Lauren mentioned, Esther Perel being one. And I'd had a lot of friends tell me about her and looked into her. And she's what our longest chapter is, Hurting by Subverting Flirting. And what Esther has done in her book, Marriage in Captivity is the name.
Mating.
And she says,
Mating in captivity.
Mating in captivity, that's right. And she says that, there's a tension between your longing for security and your longing for freedom. And this tension, that used to be thought of as pathological. If you're in a good monogamy, but you still have attractions otherwise. And so Lauren said, no, you're on the right path. Esther Perel is a great innovator here. And the same goes for Dr. Helen Fisher, who's, there's been a lot of great new discoveries in the last 50 years. And hers is the chemistry. She's called Why We Love. And it's the nature and chemistry of love. And separating, there's your initial lust, your attraction, your attachment, and each one has its own chemicals. And so Lauren knew these well, and so I realized I was on the right path then.
And what's amazing, Lauren, to me about this book is that the two of you came together. In other words, I could understand you have written the book, in terms of your background, etc., and so forth. But to get this guy from Asheville who had written some history stuff and kind of all over the place, but nothing to do with this subject, I think that's kind of cool that the two of you somehow found each other and wrote this book. Bill, if people want to get the book, what do they do? Now, I'll just hold it up again. It's the Advanced Romance.
Romance.
And it's by Bill Branyon and Lauren Eavarone. And how did they get it? What's the best bet?
On Amazon.com right now. We haven't placed it anywhere else. We're just starting our promotional efforts. But give Jeff Bezos a little money and give us a little money, and then you can get it. Or you can see excerpts from it at my website, which is BranyonsUltimateFreeThinking.com.
Okay. And Lauren, I'll ask the same question, not only so much getting the book, but if people want to track down you or find out more about you and some of the other work you do, what's the best bet?
Yeah, they can check out my website at therapyhealsus.com. And I also have a link to Amazon for the book if they're interested from there.
Okay. And Bill, the same thing, if they go to your website, I'll ask you to repeat it. Is there a link to get information about the book as well?
I just got that done last week. I'm not absolutely sure, but
okay. Well, there will be. Okay.
Yeah,
well, you can track down Bill, I know, is on Facebook. Bill, the website you did give was what again?
BranyonsUltimateFreeThinking.com.
Okay. I think, Lauren, that certainly describes Bill as kind of the ultimate free thinker, but I want to thank you both for being my guests this first half hour on the BLAINESWORLD show. Authors of Advanced Romance, Dr. Lauren Eavarone and Bill Branyon, and definitely will get you thinking. So, I've started going through it, Lauren. It's quite a book. Bill, good job. I look forward to hopefully bumping into Bill at least sometime in the near future. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so as these guys disappear, let me see if I can make them disappear. If they disappear on their own, let me see if I can. There we go. And Bill wants to stay with us. We'll make Bill disappear in a second. And I'll bring in my other guest, and I think she's waiting and asked to unmute. There she is. Edie, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, I'll just make a quick announcement, general announcement before I introduce you about WPVM's mission. You're listening to WPVM, and our mission is to foster community through programming that cultivates dialogue to inform and entertain. The station provides the medium for artists, businesses, community leaders, and nonprofits to share their voice on live radio. Listeners are invited to help support WPVM's efforts by making a tax-deductible contribution. You can do so by going to the website, WPVMFM.org, and looking at the donate option on the upper right-hand side. It's next my pleasure to introduce my second guest on today's show, and she is Edie Weinstein. And Edie, you can wave to all your fans in Facebook world.
Hola.
You're watching Edie. And Edie is this amazing woman, as you'll see. She's a licensed social worker, psychotherapist, journalist, interfaith minister, author, editor, event organizer, speaker, publicist. We've got to put in publicist. She's also a hug master?
Hug Mobsters Armed with Love is the name of the group.
If you want to hug, you'll see Edie. And she's a licensed social worker, psychotherapist, journalist, all these different things. And I think what you say there, Edie, really describes what you're all about. You guide people to live rich, full, juicy lives. And I just love that description. And that is you to a T. It's
Thank
just
you.
this amazing woman who, the question I sometimes wonder about you, Edie, do you like wear sneakers all the time to just run from one thing to another?
No, actually, I'm wearing pink footies right now. I prefer being barefoot. The closer I am to the ground, the better I feel.
But in a way, in some respects, you remind me a little bit about me, perhaps, in that I'm guessing that you've never been bored in your life, have you?
Nope.
You know,
Absolutely. I tell people that I'm frequently fascinated. I'm never bored.
I love that. How do you,
Thank
though,
you.
keep track of all the different things, you do? It's almost
I don't know.
simultaneously.
I think about a lot that in my adult life, I have never only had one job at a time. Everything that you described, I do all those things simultaneously. And I've just keep adding on. My resume is probably about 3 pages long and growing. I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, and I'm 63.
Well, it's so funny you say that, because I tell the same thing to my daughter, that all my adult life too, I would work 2-3 jobs, almost simultaneously. And my daughter was always complaining about, not having enough money. I would say to her, that's why they invented a second job, or a third job. But what's cool about you, I think, and I've always admired this about you, is that in each of the things I mentioned, I don't see them as a job for you. I just see that something you seem to enjoy doing.
Absolutely. And one of the things that people talk about regarding social workers, my master's degree is in social work, is you hear the concept, in it for the outcome, not the income. I blow raspberries at that concept, because those of us in the human services field, including your previous guests, we have the same bills to pay as anybody else. So as even though I enjoy what I do tremendously, it's what I was born to do, I still have to pay my bills like everybody else.
And talk about that concept you just said that you were born to do.
Mm-hmm.
When you were a kid, you grew up in the Philadelphia area also?
I grew up in Willingboro, New Jersey, which
Okay,
is a suburb
across the
of
river.
Philadelphia. Yeah.
So when did you decide you wanted to be this eclectic person doing 17 jobs?
Well, I didn't decide that as a child, but I had the role models in my parents. So my father had a full-time job. He volunteered in the community. He volunteered at our synagogue. He was a volunteer firefighter. He worked with a young girl in our community that either had muscular dystrophy or MS, and he did what was called patterning back then, which is sort of like, I guess, like physical therapy.
Right.
My mother, when my sister and I were young, worked from home. She was an Avon rep. She was the gate guard at our pool. She was a room mother, in our schools. What else did she do? She wrote a column for the local newspaper, which, kind of heralded what I'm doing now. She sewed doll clothes. And when we were old enough to be latchkey kids, she got a full-time job working as a switchboard operator at Sears. So my parents modeled doing it all. So but it never was a conscious thought like, oh, I want to do everything that they're doing.
Again, kind of what I always have found fascinating about you is that you get into all these different fields, but you also do them very well, and I'm saying
Thank
this
you.
as a compliment to you
Thank you.
that whatever you do, like I read a lot of your writing and your blogs, and they're all kind of interesting, and they're all different, like every time it's something different. And when you're doing, you mentioned off the air, you putting together a TED Talk presentation, and I'm
Yeah.
looking, when do we get the first book? Are we working on that?
When do we get what, the
The
first
first
book? Well, I
book?
wrote the first look. Well, where I am right now with it is I'm working with a coach,
Good.
Cesar Cervantes, so shout out. He's been walking me through the process over the last month. And I'm at the point now where I've written the TED Talk. I've submitted it to the various stages around the country, and including the around the country, they're called TEDx. So they're more local, I don't know if they're franchises, but local stages. And then I also took a leap and submitted it to Big TED, the international or national version of it. And the concept is something unbeknownst to me, I've been working on since graduate school. When I was in grad school, I went to Rutgers University in Camden, and I did a paper called Counseling Practitioners' Views on Using Touch as a Therapeutic Modality. And the concept for social workers and probably other therapists as well is you're not supposed to touch your clients.
Right.
And when I was talking to Cesar about that, he says, why? And I said, there's all kinds of reasons why we're taught touching is taboo. So he says, what if we turn it on its head and we focus on the idea that with consent and with discretion and proper judgment, it's okay to touch your client, shaking a hand, hugging if they want it. If someone's crying, you don't just shove a tissue box at them. You can ask, is it okay if I hold your hand? This must be really hard for you. Or shaking their hand coming into the first appointment. And that's the focus of the talk, is that touch by consent, non-sexual platonic touch by consent, is helpful in the therapeutic relationship. And part of what I do is that I teach my clients integrating touch by consent in their lives, because most people have experienced touch as either limited, sexual, abusive, coercive, or non-existent. Very few people, and I'm blessed to be one of them, had loving, abundant, nurturing touch by consent. So part of my role as a therapist and a consent educator is teaching people how to experience that kind of touch with the people in their lives. And it kind of ties in with what your previous guests were talking about, because intimacy is much more than what goes on below the belly button. It's from here and from here too.
You talk about touch, and I think that's perhaps one of the first times I met you or learned of your work that, I don't know if you have a title for that, but I knew you as one of the hugging experts, or certainly perhaps the first hugging expert. And we'll go into that, something else that I knew you as. But how did you become this hugging expert, or what got you into that?
Well, I grew up, again, in a very nurturing family where nobody left the house without a hug. Nobody came in without a hug. And my parents were nurturing, not just with their children, my sister and me, but with our friends and their family. So they trained me to do this. And I forget when I first heard about him, but there's a gentleman who uses the name One Man. That's not really his name, but I think it sort of stands for one man. And he is in Australia, I believe. And he's the first person that I had ever heard of that did the free hugs thing, where he stood in a town square and held up a free hug sign.
Right, yeah.
And it took 20 minutes for somebody to actually hug him. And I interviewed him I think a year ago. So I thought, that would be kind of interesting to do. So Valentine's Day weekend, 2014, I brought a group of friends to 30th Street Station, which, as you know, big train station in Philadelphia. And we did a free hugs flash mob. And I did it for two reasons. One is that I wanted people to understand that Valentine's Day is not limited to one day out of the year. It's every day. And that hugs and love and all that good stuff isn't just for couples. It's for everybody if they want it. So there were a dozen of us. And within an hour's period, we estimated that we hugged a few hundred people. And we didn't hug anybody without permission. We said, is it okay? Would you like a hug? If they said no, we said, okay, thank you. I always say hug somebody, even if it's yourself. And a really poignant moment occurred that day. A gentleman approached us. He was an Iraq war vet, and he was the only one of his platoon that made it out alive. And he had survivor's guilt. And he said, I thought about ending my life until I met you people. Can I join you?
Oh.
So we handed him a free hug sign, and he was off to the races. And you know Ruth Ann Wood. She was one of our original hug mobsters. And I'm trying to think if there's anybody else there that you would know. But Ruth Ann
was Jason with her too?
Jason was not. No,
Okay.
He missed it. But he's joined me over the years in Doylestown and New Hope. And I thought, we really have something here. It's a lot of fun. I want to do it again. That was February of 2014. In June of 2014, June 12th, I was on my way home from the gym and I had a heart attack. I was 55 years old, came totally out of the blue. And as part of my cardiac rehab, I walked around Doylestown. And I thought, why don't I combine the hugging with the walking? Since hugs are heart friendly, they're cardiac friendly and they're emotional heart friendly. So I started doing that, and friends started calling us hug mobsters, because we initially did hugs flash mob.
Yeah.
And I thought, ooh, mobsters, guns, drugs, violence. I don't think so. And I thought, what about adding the tagline, armed with love? So since then, I estimate that we, as part of, sometimes I do it by myself, have hugged thousands of people all over the country. I did it in Canada last year, it wasn't last year, in the before times, as I call it, probably 2018 or 2019. And then in 2018, I spent 10 days in Ireland. So I hugged my way across Ireland.
Just by yourself?
No. I was in it with a tour group, but I had my sign with me. I brought my sign with me.
You carry the sign with you everywhere you go?
It's in my car, actually. I keep it in my car all the time because you never know.
And describe, Edie, if you would, the value of the hug, not only for the people you hug, who are receptive to it, as you said, the key, but also for the people giving the hugs. Describe some of the reactions.
Yeah. First of all, we have skin hunger, which is just as important to meet as food hunger, because our skin is our single largest organ. And when people don't get enough nurturing touch, again, by consent, we fail to thrive. Depression, anxiety, suicidality, addiction, all contributed the loneliness that people feel when they don't get enough nurturing touch. One of the places that I went, I forget how many years ago it was, but another friend brought a group of us to a veterans homeless shelter in Kensington. Again, for those not in our area, a neighborhood in Philadelphia. And I was hugging this one man, and he said, I have not been touched in 20 years. Can you imagine not being touched for 2 decades? So I hugged him extra. I gave him a little longer hug. So it connects people. I hug strangers. When I do the free hugs thing, I don't always know everybody I'm hugging. I'm more cautious about it now. I am fully vaccinated, boosted, the whole works, but I'm still a little hesitant to get back out there full time, doing hugs. And it helps people feel like they matter. When you hug somebody, you bring them in. They're important.
Talk about making them feel like they matter. It reminds me of perhaps my all-time favorite Edie Weinstein activity. But after you've been doing this for a year, all of a sudden I saw that you were the first person I knew who's starting to have cuddle parties. Or is that what you call them?
Yeah, I didn't create the workshop. I'm a certified facilitator. Cuddle Party was created in 2004, I think, by 2 relationship coaches. And I went to one that they facilitated. I mean, I got my minister's hat on here, that they facilitated in New York. And I thought, I really want to do this. So the next year I took the training, and I was certified in 2006. And I'm number 27 out of, I don't know if we might be up to 200 now all over the world. And what Cuddle Party is a workshop for adults where people come dressed in PJs, sweats, yoga clothes, comfy clothes. And it's a workshop, again, touch by consent. We do about a 45-minute welcome circle where we talk about the rules of cuddling. If you're a yes, say yes. If you're a no, say no. If you're a maybe, say no. You're free to change your mind. But one of the most important rules is that this is a non-sexual event. Nobody gets naked. there's no sexual activity going on here, because that freaks people out. I haven't done one since 2019. No, early 2020. February of 2020 was the last one that I did. And I estimate I've facilitated over 400 of them
Wow.
in the last, since I started, since 2006. I miss it. But once again, I'm not ready. I can't speak for any other facilitator, but it's a big responsibility, and I want to make sure everybody is safe.
The thing I love about hearing these activities, Edie, and I think it's with almost just about all the stuff you do, is that just listening to them, they're kind of fun, and that,
All fun.
but it's
Yeah.
really exciting that you can get value from something, but learn from it, I guess, and enjoy it as well.
Oh
And
yeah.
I remember I never got to one of your cuddle parties. I remember I wanted to go, but so what a phenomenal idea. Again, you may have been elsewhere, but you were the first person in my area, was offering them. And I can't believe you've done 400 of these. I'm going to ask you a tough question, but you have to estimate this somewhere. How many free hugs have you given?
I haven't counted. Somebody suggested using a clicker.
Right.
I would say several thousand, because you think about where I've done them: Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, New York, Maryland, DC.
Super.
I hugged in front of the White House a couple of times. It's Vietnam War veterans. What's it called? Monument. Yeah, where the wall in DC. Where else have I hugged? In Canada, as I said, in Ireland. I went to Portland, Oregon. I hugged there. Had another life-saving story. When I got out of the car, I was visiting friends, and the first person that approached me saw my sign and asked for a hug. And he said, "You have no idea how much I needed this." He said 2 things happened this week. One of them is that a friend was diagnosed with cancer, and another either diagnosed or died from cancer, and another jumped off a bridge. And I thought about joining that friend. So again, hugs save lives. So I would say several thousand.
What's the largest number of groups wherever in a environment that you went to hug?
Well, I've hugged at some of the women's marches in Philly. I don't know if I ever did one in DC, but the women's marches, there were thousands of people in front of the White House. There were probably hundreds, it was when was it? Labor Day weekend a few years ago, 2019, I think. So I've hugged people there. I've hugged people at Christmas Village in Philly a couple of years ago. I was interviewed by on WHYY, and part of it was there. So that, I love it. I miss it. As somebody who's a consummate hugger, the only people that I hug lately have been my family and a few close friends.
What I find whenever I speak to you, there's always something else to ask you about, which is kind of cool. It's you're writing for a new publication. You have a new blog going. Right. Here's one you'll have to teach me about or tell me about. I know you're also into something called, what do you call it? Manifester. It's you call yourself a powerful manifester.
A manifester, right?
Yeah, manifester. What's that?
M-A-N-N-A, manifester, right. Like manna from heaven.
Right.
So I've manifested trip to Ireland, an interview with the Dalai Lama, clients that you had on your show last week, 2 weeks ago.
Right, yeah.
Tell you a bit about that. That's, exciting. Vic Confer and Rodney Wittenberg. I've known Rodney through some circles of friends, but Vic I've never met before. Vic is also a social worker, and they're filmmakers. And I'm their PR and marketing goddess. They have a film called Angels and Saints, Eros and Awe. And what it is, the documentary, and it interviews what I call movers and shakers, transformational speakers, who are clergy, therapists, or sex educators, all across the gender spectrum, all across the sexual orientation spectrum. And it's about the idea that we're taught in most cultures that sex and spirit are worlds apart, that sex is bad, it's dirty, it's sinful, and spirituality isn't of the body at all. So the film joins the two worlds beautifully. So there are interviews in it, there's music, there's movement, there's artistry. And what we're looking for are ways of screening it. It's made it into 10 film festivals since I came on board in March, and it's won 3 awards so far.
Very
It's
nice.
been screened at a men's community called Easton Mountain to rave reviews. They loved it. And we're looking for places, schools, seminaries, any place that educates people about sexuality and spirituality, faith communities. And right now, the screenings can be virtual. They don't have to be in person.
And talk about that concept, though, how you help other people, though, manifest their destinies.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you're doing
Yeah.
these two filmmakers, but explain what that entails.
Okay. Well, I believe that anything that we can think about and focus on, we can create to some extent. We wouldn't have had the idea if it wasn't possible, whatever it is. And in my case, like I said, one of the big things I manifested was the interview with the Dalai Lama.
Well, that's pretty
He came to
exciting.
Philadelphia in 2008, and I had wanted to interview him for 20 years. So for 10 years, from 88 to 98, I was the co-publisher of Visions magazine. My husband and I created the magazine, did it for 10 years. And the year that we completed the selling, we sold the magazine, my husband died. He had hepatitis C. And after we sold the magazine, I became a freelancer for other publications. And my dream into reality interview, as I called it, was with the Dalai Lama. And everybody in my life said, oh, you can do this. We know someday it'll happen. We just don't know when. We don't know how. So I started seed planting. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I've interviewed other transformational speakers, teachers, whatever. So I created a vision board with pictures of the Dalai Lama. And somebody said, well, why don't you put a picture of yourself in there next to him? So there's proximity. Then I started writing questions as if I'd be interviewing him the next day. I told people that I'd want to do this. And in 2000, this was 2008, so 2006, I was asked to do some PR work for a presentation he was giving at Rutgers Stadium in New Brunswick. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And by the way, is he granting interviews? And they said, no, he's not. And I said, all right, well, I'll do it anyway. So I walked around the stadium with a tape recorder and I interviewed people, asking them what they were doing there, what His Holiness meant to them. And at the end of the event, they gave us each postcards with his picture on it. So I taped the postcard to my dashboard of my car. So he was with me in the car. He was with me on the vision board. He was with me in my heart. He was with me in my, my brain, thinking about the interview. And then I had to do the hardest part of manifesting, surrender. Let it go, because I did everything that I could. So in early 2008, I was asked to help out because he was coming to Philadelphia in July of that year. And I said, sure. And by the way, is he? No. And I said, all right. So all right. It's like the kids' game. You're getting warmer. So a dear friend of mine, Greg Schultz, I don't know if you knew him from up here, was an American-born Buddhist. And he's very much involved with the Tibetan rights movement. So he had an in. He was the event producer for when His Holiness came to Philly. And he said, I can't promise, but I've told them about you. And I really, really, really want you to do this interview, have the interview. So months went by and he kept saying, not 100%, but it's looking good. So in July, 2 weeks before the interview, I was at the Exponential Music Festival that's sponsored by WXPN, Philadelphia radio station. And I was standing somewhere in a field or whatever with two friends. One of them is a photographer. Phone rings and it's my friend Greg. He said, are you sitting down? And I said, should I be? And he said, yes, you got the interview. And by the way, you're the only journalist in Philadelphia that His Holiness has granted an interview with. I screamed into the phone. My photographer friend snapped the picture.
Wow.
And the rest is history. So he says, okay, catch your breath. I'll tell you tomorrow where it's going to be. And he said, but you can't tell anybody. And I said, you think I would tell somebody where it's going to go? So he calls me the next day and he says, you still have the interview, but they want the Philadelphia Inquirer involved too. And I was doing it as a freelancer for the Intel, the Bucks County paper. And you don't think I said, nah, if I can't have an exclusive, I don't want it. So I said, sure, just, we'll figure it out. So the day before the interview, I'm standing with David O'Reilly, who was he was the religion columnist for the Inquirer at the time. And we're looking around at the other journalists, like two conspiratorial little kids, thinking they don't know that tomorrow at this time we're going to be with His Holiness. So David said, I got a new suit for the occasion. I said, I got a new dress for the occasion. So we met the next day, and I had what I call somewhat like when he first told me about the interview, somewhere between what did I say? Orgasmic bliss and holy, am I allowed to say the S word? You know what I mean? Holy absent, terror, like absolute terror. And I say, when in doubt, go for the orgasmic bliss. So I walked in, totally surrealistic. And when you meet His Holiness, you wear a white scarf called a kata, and he, takes it, blesses it, puts it around your shoulders. Well, as soon as I walked in the room at the Four Seasons, which is where he was, I started crying, and I thought, oh my God, what if I forget what I'm going to say? Impostor syndrome kicked in. And he approaches me, does the thing with the kata, and then he hugs me. He reached out to hug me. And I have never experienced a hug like that before. So it's one of those situations where I say, like when you're in junior high school and the person you have a crush on kisses you on the cheek and you say, I'll never wash again. I've washed a lot since then. But we were originally only going to be given, I don't know, it was like 15 minutes each. Right. David and his photographer and me with my photographer. So the day before, I said to David, what if we go in together and we get half an hour? He gave us 45 minutes. And I'll have to send you the picture.
I'd love to see it.
With His Holiness.
But
so I tell people, never, ever, ever give up on your dreams.
But what an exciting story. But like I said, now I see it, how you manifested it. You had it coming. But you just mentioned something else, Edie, in passing there. You also said something called an impostor syndrome. What's that? Yep.
Impostor syndrome is when successful people feel that they're going to be found out as imposters, that they're really not all that in a bag of chips. That they didn't earn their place. They didn't. People are going to find out that they're imposters, that they're not really as good as they think as they're being told they are. So my thought was, the way that I counteracted that was to say, look, you would not have been given this opportunity if you didn't earn it. Now, I don't have a degree in journalism. Never went to school for journalism. I went for psychology and social work, but it was seat of the pants learning when I had Visions. And Visions magazine, and when I became a freelancer. So I knew how to write an article. I knew what I wanted to ask him, and they were not the typical Q&A. They were not about the politics of Tibet. They were about who he is as a person. He was 75 at the time, and God bless him, he's 88 this year, I think he turned 88. So I wanted to know who he was, what brought him joy, how he connected with people. What his legacy was. And that was the only question he got kind of feisty about. He said, no. In Tibetan culture, or Buddhist culture, legacy not matter. And he spoke like that. He spoke without, is it prepositions? I forget what the grammatical term is. But he said, what we do here is more important than how we're remembered, was the general concept. But it was magic. So every time I see a picture of him or hear about him, I think, oh, that's my buddy. So I did write about that interview for a number of different publications, and it's also a chapter in my book.
Okay, as we wind down, Edie, just ask you a favor. You can send me that article and picture. I'd love to see it.
Oh, yeah.
But the last question I'll ask you, if folks want to track you down in terms of finding out what you're up to, some of your writing, best bet to keep track of you is what?
Right. Well, two ways. One is my website. It's www.opti-mystical.com. And where that title came from is that I had a messages come to me in dreams and meditation, where it said, you're not just an optimist, you're an optimistic who sees the world through the eyes of possibility.
I love it. Hold on. Wait, just let me ask the other website, if you would, to get to track you down.
Yeah, that's optimistical.com. And then I'm on Facebook as Edie Weinstein, Weinstein. That's where you'll see links to my articles and places that I write.
And encourage you, if they want to meet somebody interesting, get in touch with Edie Weinstein. I think you'll be blown away by the experience. Thank you, Edie, for being my guest this second half hour on the Blaine's World Show. Bill Branyon and Lauren Eavarone being my guest the first half hour. We hope to see you next Wednesday, same time, same place. And lastly, thanks to Amy Pierce-Nash, my producer. Speak to you soon, Edie. Stay with me
Adios.
just a second as we go off the air.